Right, hello guys, welcome back. Typically, when building an Arc Hunter build, you choose between either Tempest Strike or Ascension and never both, which is exactly what we've done here on this channel in the past. I've made one build back in Final Shape focusing on Ascension because it was new, then one build focusing on Tempest Strike in Revenant because of the Raiju's harness changes. The reason you could never run both was because if you did, you lost the ability to run Flow State, which massively fueled your dodge recharge. In fact, it's a 300% regen buff, so for builds revolving around Ascension, a class ability, or Tempest Strike, a melee ability you could very easily get back with, you guessed it, a class ability, Flow State was borderline mandatory, and without it you'd be stuck with incredibly long cooldowns you couldn't do anything about. However, that all changes today. You see, with the release of Episode Heresy, Ascension received a change to where it can now activate the effects of your equipped class ability, and if you happen to be running Gambler's Dodge, yes, this does mean you get your melee charge back when using Ascension near targets. And what can you then do? That's right, you can use that melee charge to trigger Tempest Strike, and then after that it's simply a case of finding as many ways of refueling your class ability energy to be able to use Ascension again, which then lets you use your melee again, and so on and so forth, which is exactly the focus of today's build. Today I'm going to share with you an Arc Hunter build that not only lets you run both Tempest Strike and Ascension at the same time with minimal cooldowns, but also completely puts to shame the old setups that clinged so tightly onto Flow State, an aspect which, in regards to builds like this, is now a thing of the past. This build essentially combines all of the benefits of the previous two I've created into one single masterpiece that I'm calling Arc Hunter Perfected. And furthermore, the release of Episode Heresy marked the addition of a brand new arc verb known as Bolt Charge that you've probably become quite familiar with by now, and it too will feature as a prominent part of this build. With this setup, you're going to be able to spam your Tempest Strike and Ascension non-stop as long as there are ads available, gain massive amounts of damage resistance and heal while doing so, and be able to charge your super in as little as 30 seconds. So, without further ado, let's begin by breaking down our subclass configuration. Initially, I put down Arc Staff as the super to use for this build, since overall it's a pretty good super now. Even without Raid and Flux, it still puts in the work. But given that the super isn't really the most core part of this build, I've instead opted for Storm's Edge. One, because it's awesome and one of the coolest looking supers in the game, and two, because it actually deals quite a lot of damage and manages to deal with grouped ads pretty well on its own. So Storm's Edge it is. Don't let the 10-minute and 25-second cooldown scare you off. It really isn't that noticeable once we talk about how the rest of the build makes up for it. For the class ability, we are of course taking Gambler's Dodge as we discussed earlier, because this is what lets us regain our melee when using Ascension. Speaking of, your choice of melee ability doesn't actually matter given that we're using it for the purposes of Tempest Strike and not its own. So I've just gone for Combination Blow. Grenade wise, I've gone for Storm Grenade, but you could also just as easily swap this for Pulse Grenade if you wanted to. It doesn't make a huge difference. As far as the aspects are concerned, well, you already know. We're going to be taking both Tempest Strike and Ascension, but while we're here, this seems like a good time to let you know that Tempest Strike got a pretty huge buff recently. When the episode released, Tempest Strike had its damage increased by 57% and got given a new behavior where defeating any jolted target, regardless of whether it's with the melee or not, will grant you stacks of the new verb Bolt Charge. So this is the main way we're going to be leaning into generating stacks of Bolt Charge with this build. Besides the class ability activation buff, Ascension has remained the same, but now the one obvious synergy is the one it has with Tempest Strike, because it too applies Jolt to nearby enemies when cast, which now grants stacks of Bolt Charge like we mentioned. So now these two aspects work in harmony far better than they ever did before, which is great because I've always wanted to make a build using them both. So let's continue. Fragments wise, we're starting with Spark of Resistance. This is just your bog standard fragment to run on most Arc builds, since it provides a flat 25% damage resist when near 3 or more enemies, so quite handy for the aggressive playstyle this build promotes. Next is Spark of Focus. This fragment allows your class ability to regenerate 150% faster after sprinting for 1.25 seconds, which is sort of like a pseudo flow state for those moments where you aren't in combat and are running from one objective to the next and need class ability energy back. After that, we're taking Spark of Frequency, which is going to improve the reload speed and stability of our weapons after dealing melee damage, but also double the amount of Bolt Charge we gain from all sources while amplified. And I mentioned this in the last build video, but this fragment is borderline mandatory to run on any Arc build from now on. It's stupidly good, so definitely use this. Our fourth fragment is going to be Spark of Amplitude, which is going to make it so getting a double kill from any source while amplified will spawn an Orb of Power, which is going to help with cooldown related things a little later on. Unfortunately, this orb creation effect does have a 10-second cooldown, but it's better to have it than not, and you'll soon come to see why. Another thing I forgot to mention about Ascension is that like its prismatic version, the Arc version was buffed from carrying 2 fragment slots to now 3, which finally lets us carry 5 fragments on Arc Hunter, the 5th of which is going to be Spark of Shock to make our arc grenades apply the Jolt debuff. Now for our choice of weaponry, starting with an old favorite, Scatter Signal. But really, this could be any fusion rifle. Reason being is we just want some fusion rifle option to take advantage of particle reconstruction from the artifact. But more on that shortly. The one weapon I would highly encourage you getting for this build is the Word of Crota hand cannon, or more generally, any weapon with the combo of repulsor brace destabilizing rounds. Word of Crota just so happens to be one of the better picks specifically for this build because of the origin trait Cursed Thrall that allows final blows after getting a melee kill to explode. And given that we're going to be getting melee kills pretty often with Tempest Strike and the fact that Cursed Thrall lasts for 7.5 seconds, we're pretty much going to have it active all the time. Further to that, the combo of repulsor brace destabilizing rounds is now very strong, largely in part due to the reworked destabilizing rounds received, where you now get 5 seconds of volatile rounds after every kill, which is excellent not only for crowd control but also for a very specific artifact synergy which we will promptly discuss. So, speak of the devil, the very first important perk we're going to need is Volatile Marksman in column 2. This perk makes it so rapid void weapon precision hits and rapid void weapon final blows grant volatile rounds. But to be honest, we don't really care about this part. The part which we truly do care about is the boost, which states volatile detonations grant class ability energy. And what do we happen to need more of in an Ascension focused build? Well, I'm sure you can work that one out. The bonus class ability energy from this perk is going to make regenerating our Ascension much easier and faster, which is why having Word of Crota works so well, since this will be our primary source of volatile rounds. Also in column 2, we're taking Unraveling Orbs so that Scatter Signal has the ability to apply Unravel after collecting an orb. Moving into column 3, we're going to need Dielectric, which is going to make it so defeating arc debuff targets grants Bolt Charge, which is a nice bonus since both Tempest Strike and Ascension apply Jolt, but again, the meat of this perk is in the boost, this time stating that rapidly defeating arc debuff targets spawns an orb of power and heals a small portion of your health. So now for simply getting a bunch of kills with either Tempest Strike or Ascension, we're also making more orbs and healing while doing so. Arc builds have always lacked any consistent healing, so this is a welcome addition to the build. In column 4, we first want Maligned Harvest, which will make it so rapidly applying Volatile causes your next instance of void weapon damage to create a weakening burst. And truthfully, you won't see this happen too often, but it's just there on the off chance it does. Flashover is next, and this is yet another mandatory mod since all it does is make you amplified when hitting maximum bolt charge, but more importantly, it also increases the damage of your bolt charge lightning bolts by 2.5 times, a rather significant increase. Finally, in column 4, we might as well take Horde Shuttle for when we use Scatter Signal versus a boss, because this will make it so damaging unraveled targets occasionally spawns Threadlings on them. Lastly, in column 5, we touched on it briefly before, but we are of course going to want Particle Reconstruction to provide the huge 27% fusion rifle damage debuff to targets, which is mostly here for when dealing with beefier enemies. And finally, we're also going to want to take Defibrillating Blast to make it so each and every lightning bolt we cause also applies Jolt and returns a small portion of health and shields. Alright then, the last two pieces of the puzzle are exotic armor and mod choices. So let's begin by talking about our exotic armor of choice, the Arc Hunter staple, Gifted Conviction. Gifted Conviction is going to make it so activating either Tempest Strike or Ascension will throw bouncing explosives at nearby targets that jolt and damage them. Furthermore, jolting nearby targets in close proximity grants you damage resistance. So, given that we're using both of those abilities, this exotic just makes perfect sense, and I bet you could see it coming from a mile away, as is the case with most Hunter Ascension builds, but that is by no means a weakness. There's a reason why this chess piece is so popular, and that is the fact that at maximum stacks of resist, which is 4 in this case, yields a 50% damage negation from all sources, and because we're going to be jolting everything left, right and center, this effect will be active almost all the time. On top of that, I haven't even mentioned yet that the amplified effect was also buffed in Episode Heresy to provide a flat 15% damage resist while active and causes enemies to be less accurate when targeting you, which is honestly an Arc Hunter's dream come true. So now let's tie it all together with our mod choices. Starting with the helmet, we're taking double hands on for that bonus super energy on melee kills, and Void Siphon to spawn orbs when getting double kills with Word of Crota. For the gloves, you'll want Focusing Strike and Bolstering Detonation for the class ability energy gains, and I've also put a single heavy-handed to occasionally spawn orbs when getting kills with Tempest Strike. For the chest piece, we're actually going with a single charged up to increase our maximum armor charge to 4, then general resist mods like usual. For the boots, we're going to need stacks on stacks so we get 2 armor charge from each orb collected, installation for more class ability energy, and recuperation for the health boost. Finally, for the class item, we're going to want triple utility kickstart so that each time you use your Ascension, you consume all stored armor charge and get a good chunk of it back. And assuming you had 4 armor charges to start with, that combined with 3 kickstarts should result in around half of your your class ability returning, which only makes it easier to reach your next ascension. As far as the gameplay loop is concerned, the build is very aggressive and in your face, but don't worry, the damage resist you obtain from kills is more than enough to keep you alive. Plus, the artifact is also providing you with heals, so don't be afraid to get in there. Furthermore, always make sure to use your Tempest Strike first, because if you don't have your Ascension back in time, you won't be able to get it back fast. So always Tempest Strike first, then Ascension right after to get it back. Besides that, when you're waiting for your Ascension to come back, simply get as many kills as you can with Word of Crota, which in combination with Volatile Marksman should get you back to it in no time. And from there on, just carry on looping your abilities as best you can. So that about does it for today's build. Here is the fashion I used if you want to copy it, and I do have to give credit to Crips and his community here, since I ripped this piece right from his post tab. I absolutely love it, by the way. Anyway, that's all for today. I'll see you in the next one. If you made it this far, thank you so much. Your support means the world. And if you're really into the content I create, consider becoming a member of the channel, which not only lets you support me in the best way possible, it also nets you a whole host of awesome perks along with it. A massive shout out to these members up on screen, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now, dear viewer.